So what are you doing, Kman? Well, what I'm doing is my morning run. Yes, I'm doing my road work. I've got an upcoming fight. So the first thing I do every morning at the crack of dawn, I get up and I go for a good half-hour run to get me in shape for my upcoming fight, whether it be boxing, kickboxing, judo, whatever it is, because that's what Rocky did, therefore it must be right, and that's what the great Joe Louis did, that's what Muhammad Ali did, and Joe Fraser, they all do that. And that's really interesting, because as everyone else is doing it, then it must be right. Well, that's what I used to do. Yes, I've been fighting all of my life, since I was 10 years of age. Started with judo when I was 10. Added to the suite of martial arts, I added taekwondo when I was 13. Became a kickboxer at 17, turned pro kickboxing when I was 19, and has fought many competitions in all different styles of martial arts. Obviously my mainstream has been judo, taekwondo and kickboxing, but I've also fought at world and international level tournaments and open martial arts and karate and all sorts of weaponry and all sorts of stuff. And when I was a young buck, yes, we were always young, that was some time ago, that's for sure, that's what I used to do, because that's what everyone else did. And because everyone else is doing it, does that mean it's right? And that's a great question. And as I educated myself through physiology, particularly when I was in physiology, I started to question lots of the things that I was doing. I was thinking to myself, well, maybe there's a better way. Why am I doing it this way? Because everyone else is doing it. That's not really a good scientific reason. Because if I ask why we do the road work, yeah, it builds your base, that's what it is. So what is your base? What is the measurement of your base? What is it? Is it centimeters? Is it as milliliters? Is it in oxygen? Is it in distance? Is it in weight? Is it in strength? What is your base? A lot of people throw that out, builds a foundation and builds a base, but if you start to, unpack that and pull it apart, it's just really a superficial name with nothing underneath it. And it's good if there is something underneath it, if you can explain it from an anatomical, physiological point of view, that would be great, but no one seemed to be able to do that. So I started to think for myself and ask this basic two questions, is why am I doing this and how does it work from an anatomical and a physiological point of view? And I'm going to get you to think, because I'm not here to tell you what to think, because I've spent my life, everyone else telling me what to think. And it wasn't until I started thinking for myself that I started finding better ways. So I'm not here to tell you what to think, but if I can challenge you to think for yourself and help you to think for yourself and ask those questions that no one asks and everyone just follows, then you may find a better way, particularly when you get to my age, a young 30, no, not really, I'm fast approaching 60 and I'm still competing. I've got a World Championships coming up in 11 weeks. Yes, it came up in my calendar, 11 weeks before I go off to Italy to fight in the World Taekwondo Championships. And I'm also looking at some judo championships throughout the year as well, because I love both. And I want to be great at both, but I want to make sure that I train right, get my maximal benefit in the unit of time, so I get a big bang for my buck, but I also do it not just in an efficient and in an effective way, but I want to do it in a safe way, because as you get older, you get a little bit more tender in the joints, and you have to train smarter. And a lot of the time, we don't have a lot of time to train. When I was a young kickboxer, then I had plenty of time to train. Now I've got other things in my life that's important, so I have to wedge it into my life, not my life into my training. So a great question is, why do we do these long, what I call plug jogs? And what I used to do when I was young, I'd go for a 30-minute run, and for 29 minutes, yes, I'd run around and jog around the streets in the early mornings, with the barking dogs and waking up the neighbours, and in the last minute of the jog I would sprint down Roach Road where I used to live in Brisbane, and I'd sprint in here. I'd go, oh, I'd be huffing and puffing and go, wow, what a great half-hour run. Really, the question is, was it really a great half-hour run, or was it really just a great 1-minute sprint after a 29-minute plug jog? Do I get the benefit of the plug jog? The 29 minutes of preparing, the 29-minute warm-up for the last 1 minute sprint at the end? And that's the question I asked. I thought, well, really, when I fight in judo or kickboxing, whatever it might be, it's not a 29-minute race. It's not a 29-minute bout. It's basically, when I was a professional kickboxer, I used to do 10 2-minute bouts. We did 2 minutes back in those days. But it's still really a subdivision of whole blocks of 2 minutes, not one block of 30 minutes. So from a common sense point of view, if you look at doing your cardiovascular training, and that's the way a lot of people still do it, they go out there and they do basically a 30-minute plug jog, which is really a 20-minute plug jog. They might do a sprint, 1-minute sprint at the end. So that first 29 minutes is really jogging at a sub-maximal level, because you're not really out of puff, you're not really out of breath, you're not like this, you're sort of plugging along, getting through, and all you're basically doing is, in my view now, is just wearing out your joints because you're just doing a high repetitive train type activity. And then in the last minute, you really open up your lungs and you open up your blood vessels and you maximally contract your muscles and you release all your maximal hormones and your action hormones and you fly to the end. So really you get the maximal benefits from that high intense activity at the end. Maybe I would have been better off just doing the 1 minute sprint in the morning, getting up, do the 1 minute sprint, and save my joints from the 29 minutes of torture on the bitumen roads of my suburb back then. I would even suggest that I'd probably get even more benefit if I just did the 1 minute sprint, because I wouldn't be fatigued for 29 minutes. And plus, because I only doing a minute, I may probably put more into it because I know I don't have to go through the half hour, the 29 minutes to get to the minute. I can just go straight to the minute and I'm fresh, I'm tuned in, I'm focused, I'm intensified to do the 1 minute. So I'm not saying do 1 minute, but in a way I am saying 1 minute is probably better than 30 minutes of average running. 1 minute of intense sprinting will give you greater cardiovascular effects, because really it is you're pushing your cardiovascular threshold to a high level. And what I'm going to talk about today is the energy systems that get you through that half-hour run, but most importantly the energy system that gets you through maybe a 3-minute judo bout, or there'll be in taekwondo I do two 2-minute rounds with a 1 minute rest in between. What is the energy system that I use to perform? Or if you're doing kickboxing, where you might do more rounds, maybe 5 2-minute rounds or 5 3-minute rounds. What are the energy systems that you use? Now, there are basically 3 energy systems. There's 3 systems that the body relies on to perform in a cardiovascular or motion activity where we derive energy from. It's like, I guess, I've been around a lot, and my first car was a 1973 Datsun 180B. And back in those days, cars only had 3 gears. They had first gear, second gear, third gear, and I was really advanced. I had a shift down here when you had, most cars had the old column shift, but I had a 3-gear Datsun 180B. And basically if you look at the 3 gears, and it's similar to the body and the 3 energy systems, and I cross compare to help you maybe understand how each one works, is in my Datsun 180B, the first gear is for quick acceleration, get off the mark quickly, and I can go fast acceleration, but I could only do it for a short period of time. So I wouldn't stay in first gear on the motorway and try to get to 100 kilometers an hour, blow the motor out, and you get the a lot of stress. But it's really good to get off the mark quickly in first gear. Now in the body we call that the phosphate system. So there's a system in the body that's there for fast motion, get sprinting, high exertion of force very quickly for speed. And that's probably the energy system that protects us when, if we're back in camper, back in gather and hunter days, when the tiger comes into our where we're cooking in our little village, or whether we're out there by the campfire, and we got to get out of there quickly to save our life, to climb that tree or to sprint or to jump off the cliff into the river to get away from the charging bear. So we can generate force and energy very quickly through the phosphate system, and that lasts up to about 10 seconds. And I'll go down to the deeper levels soon, so you can more get a better understanding of it. Back to my Datsun 180B, the second gear is second gear. The second gear is second gear. The first gear is first gear, right? First gear, quick acceleration. Second gear, I want to keep accelerating, but I can't accelerate as quickly as first gear, but I can still keep accelerating for a bit longer to that transition into third gear. So second gear is that middle gear between first gear and third gear in the Datsun that it's still accelerating, not as fast as first gear, but it goes longer and it gets you up to a higher speed to get to the third gear. Now in the body we call that the lactate system. The lactate system lasts up to 2 minutes. So the phosphate after 10 seconds and the lactate system goes up to 2 minutes, where I can still accelerate, I can still go at a fast pace, but not as fast as the first 10 seconds. And then you go back to my Datsun 180B, the classic car, who's a lovely orange too, very ugly orange, is third gear. And third gear is where you settle down for the long trip. You're whacking the third gear and you're on the motorway now and you're sort of cruising down the motorway. So that's that cruise mode into third gear. Now obviously cars now have 5 gears, 6 gears, and they have lots of gears in between obviously, but back in my day it was simply 3 gears, so using that as the analogy. So in the body, that is the aerobic energy system. So that's the aerobic energy system that now you're not accelerating, you're not exerting high amounts of energy or force, you're going for a good run and you're comfortable. You're comfortable. Where first and second gear, you're uncomfortable. In the car, first, second gear, you can hear the engines revving, so it's not comfortable. You see the little rev, it's up in the red zone, then comes back, and goes in the red zone in second gear and comes back. But when you get in the third gear, it's not in the red zone, it's in the cruise zone. And that's the aerobic energy system in the body, and that can continue for long periods of time. As long as I've got enough petrol in the tank to keep me going, the engine will keep floating. So if I look at it from a sporting point of view that everyone can probably understand, is first gear, if you look at, most of us watch the Olympics and you see the athletics, first gear will be the 100-meter sprint. So you go bam out of the blocks and you go for about 10 seconds. So that's purely phosphate energy system that you're relying on. I'll break down how that actually works. But a 100-meter sprint, and they can't keep going. They cross the finish line. They've actually start slowing down around 60, 70 meters because that's they reach peak velocity around maybe 40 meters, and they can maintain that for about 20, 30 meters, and they start to slow down, even though it still looks like they're going fast because they're slow as my fast because they're pretty fast naturally and very high athletic. So that's the phosphate system in sporting in the track and field. Now the lactate system, if you kept going for 200 meters and 300 meters and 400 meters, you won't be able to go as fast. You have to bring down the speed, but it's still fast. You're still exerting lots of energy. You're still going quickly, and that's the 200, 300, 400 meters that's going into the lactate system. And the longer it goes, the more you go down. You're still in the lactate system, but at a lower intensity, up to maybe about 800 meters, which takes around about 2 minutes. And the lactate system is that system where you get a lot of jelly legs and lactic acid, and you feel a bit nauseous. A lot of people don't like the lactate system because it's quite nauseating due to the lactic acid buildup, which I'll talk about soon. In the phosphate system, there's no lactic acid buildup. It's purely just using the energy, and there's no metabolic byproducts, which we'll talk more about. And then if you go beyond that into the 5,000 meter or the 3,000 meter, the 5,000 meter, the 10K, and you go up to the marathon, that's going to be the aerobic energy system, where you get into a bit of a pace, you get into a rhythm, and you've got control over your breathing. Where the 100 meter, 200, 300, 400 meter, you haven't got control over your breathing, because you're really exerting more energy, as much as you can, then you can supply, and we'll talk more about that. So if you look at your sport of judo, 3 minutes or 2 minutes, or taekwondo, 2 2-minute rounds, they're not in the aerobic energy system. Because even in judo in those 3 minutes, or even a boxing 3 minutes in a boxing round, you're not going flat out for those 3 minutes. You just move around and you grab the gi and you're wrestling, you get yourself in position. And when you do go for a throw and you wrestle, it's only a matter of seconds of maximal effort. Then you have a break and you break away, and the referee separates you and you get back together and you get your breath back and you start to grab each other again. The same with boxing. You're moving around, I'm not expressing high amounts of force. I'm not sprinting yet. I'm just moving around, and then I'm shoot jabs and some punches. And it's only in a matter of seconds, a cluster of seconds, that I throw a cluster of punches, a cluster of seconds that I try a cluster of throws, a cluster of seconds that I try some takedowns or whatever. So you find that in that 3 minutes or the 2 minutes, even in that 3 minutes, there's these little intervals of high maximal intensity with recovery phases, high intensity recovery phases. So even in that 3 minutes, it's not like a 400 meter sprint where you're going maximal effort for 400 meters, which is 1 minute, probably 2 minutes for me, where in judo or taekwondo or martial arts or kickboxing, there are these little interval bursts of maximal effort. And that those interval bursts, a lot of the time, are just little phosphate bursts. They're phosphate bursts of energy. You know, you're like a little quick sprint. And then you have a rest and you get your heart rate up. And if they go over 10 seconds, they go a bit lactate. And then you continue and then you go again. And by the end, you're huffing and puffing and huffing and puffing if you put a lot of these bursts of energy in that round. But those bursts of energy isn't the aerobic energy system. They're like me going in first gear, just cruising along, and all of a sudden dropping in the first gear, then cruising really slow, then in the second gear, and they're little bursts of energy. It's not like one single track of the same rhythmical motion of using energy. So it's important. So when you start to think of how judo is played and how kickboxing is fought and taekwondo is competed, if you look at how the intensity goes up and down and the speed goes up and down, it doesn't even from a common sense replicate me going out for a half-hour run. Even if that run's really relatively fast, I'm still not getting to that maximal speed because I'm in the aerobic energy system. I'm never actually entering down into the phosphate and the lactate. I'm in third gear all the time. I'm not dropping it down to second and first. The only time I go to second and first is in that last minute sprint. I take off in that last minute. The first 10 seconds is the first gear, and then I go into second gear to finish off the sprint to feel yes, and that I feel like I've had a great workout. So that's from a common sense point of view. The movement and the distance and the intensity of a plog jog is not replicated in the sporting event. Plus, long slow plog jogging activates your slow twitch muscle fibers, whereas a lot of martial art movements, performance movements in judo and taekwondo and kickboxing, like a jab or a fast kick or quick takedown or a powerful hold, relies on your fast twitch muscle fibers. Because the body has three different types of fibers. Slow twitch, which are small muscle fibers. They exert lower levels of force, but they have a high endurance. And you have fast twitch, which is your fast glycolytics, which are larger fibers. They exert high amounts of force, but they have a low endurance. And then you have your intermediate fibers called FOG, fast oxidative glycolytic, and they can be adapted by training to take on the characteristics of slow twitch or fast twitch. So a lot of martial art performance techniques, jabbing, takedowns, holds, kicks, depend on fast twitch muscle fibers. Where long distance events or sporting events such as long distance running and swimming relies on more slow twitch muscle fibers. So be careful that your training is conducive to the type of muscle fibers that you want to activate. So going for long, slow, rhythmical distance type movements such as long, slow plug jogging is going to train your body to activate slow twitch muscle fibers, not the fast twitch. So you train your body to be slow. But if you want to train your body to be fast, you've got to do the movements that activate your fast twitch muscle fibers, such as sprints, plyometric jumps and clap push-ups, and things such as weight training, or all of those ballistic type, explosive type movements and power training. And they're going to train your fast twitch muscle fibers, which are going to be more in line with the types of movement patterns and speed and contraction forces and muscle activation levels of, say, sporting events such as in fighting, combat sports, kicking and punching and takedowns, which is rely on speed and power and agility and all those types of things. So just be careful that your training, everything is steered towards the outcome that you want. You know, if you want to head north, make sure you head north and don't head south. Activate fast twitch fibers, not slow twitch fibers, to be fight ready, combat ready for when you compete. The other thing to consider is when I plug jog, it's very linear. I'm going in a straight line, my heel's hitting the ground first, and then I'm rolling onto my toe. So it's heel, toe, heel, toe. However, when I fight, in boxing, I'm up on my toes. I'm going laterally, I'm going sideways. In judo, it's even more complicated. I'm flipping it all, I'm on my boards and my feet, I'm pushing and turning. So the biomechanics or activation of those muscles aren't really the same either. So if you've got to look at, is it specific to the sporting intensity movement pattern, biomechanics, muscle activation? Not really. So what I find from an anatomical point of view, it's hard to justify to go for these long distance runs because that's what we've always done. That's the traditional thing we do in boxing or sport. We go for these long jogs, and most people don't even like them. You know, they wear in the body, they're repetitive, they put strain through the joints, and they're consistently the same strain through the same biomechanical line of load. At least in fighting, we have various lines of load going through the muscles in different angles with different movements. Therefore, I'm not getting that repeated exact stress going through the joint, and that will lead to what we call repetitive strain injuries. Not to mention, it's kind of boring going for long jogs, where training rounds or playing randori and judo is actually quite exciting and stimulating, not just physically but also mentally. So let's go down a bit more from a physiological point of view to a deeper level, and where the energy come from for each of those systems. So in the car, for example, first, second, third gear, we have what? Petrol. Petrol is the fuel that fuels the first gear, second gear, third gear. And obviously in first gear with high acceleration, you need a greater amount of energy in a shorter period of time. In second gear, not quite as much in a shorter period of time. And for third gear, then that's the aerobic system, then you're going to have that continuous supply of energy, but not at a rapid rate. That way you get better fuel mileage, I suppose, if you're in third gear rather than going first gear, second gear, first gear, second gear, first gear, second gear. Well, the body's the same. Now, the energy source in the body to produce energy comes from an energy-rich molecule called ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. Now, adenosine triphosphate is stored in all the cells of the body, and it's used to produce energy through everything. The respiratory system, the digestive system, the muscular system, the cardiovascular system, all the systems in the body, the rebuilding of the body, in the skin, everything relies on ATP. ATP is the energy source. So a couple of things about fundamentals about energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only change its form. So you can't create energy, you can only change the form of energy. So energy in a molecule, ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine is the adenosine molecule, and it has 3 phosphate molecules attached to it, like a yellow piece of Lego with 3 red pieces of Lego attached to it. The red pieces are the phosphate molecule, and the yellow is the adenosine molecule. Now, energy is stored in the bonds of the molecules. So energy, they're the physical molecules, and energy keeps them together. Now, if I break a molecule apart, where I pull a molecule apart, if I break one of the phosphate molecules off the adenosine triphosphate, what that would do is the energies in the bonds, that will release energy for me to use to create muscular contraction. All right, whether it be the muscle contraction of the lungs or muscle contraction of my skeletal muscles, whatever it might be, I won't go too deep. So when I require energy quickly, say for a 100-meter sprint or a flurry of quick punches, or to go quickly into a drop nagi or whatever it might be into my sport, and I have to do it quickly, the ATP, because it's stored in the cells of the body, it's very much accessible. So straight away you can break the molecule apart, release the energy instantly to do the throw, to do the punches, or whatever it might be, or bring someone down and put them into an arm bar, or whatever it might be. In sprinting, it's a sprint off the mark, right? And various sports will apply it, whether it be a break in rugby league, bam, that gets through the gap, that's the phosphate to get the acceleration to break away from the pack. So the ATP is available, it releases energy, it will give you energy for up to, well actually the ATP will give you energy up to about two seconds. Didn't you say 10? Yes, it is 10, but there's another molecule in the cells of the body called CP, creatine phosphate. So what creatine phosphate, because it's accessible and it's there in the cell, it can rebuild ATP. So what it does, it breaks the creatine phosphate. So that might be the creatine phosphate, might be a green Lego set with a red phosphate attached to it. It breaks apart, and that phosphate molecule goes and reattaches to the adenosine triphosphates that's now missing a phosphate molecule. It's now called adenosine diphosphate. Di means 2. So it attaches the adenosine diphosphate to rebuild it, that allows it to break it apart again. And it breaks apart again to release its energy, and the creatine phosphate will keep doing that, cycling it around to continue that maximal effort of energy production, and it will take it up to about 10 seconds. So those two molecules can work, ATP can work by itself to produce energy from maximum effort for 2 seconds around about. And because the creatine phosphate's there, it can extend that out to 10 seconds. And I'm not going to go any deeper than that. Normally I have lots of little things and diagrams I can play with, but I won't go. But basically there are 2 molecules in the phosphate system. Now, then after, if you just go on a 100-meter track or go on a 400-meter track and you go sprinting, you feel what happens to you. You sprint first and you're feeling great for the first couple seconds, then up to 5 seconds, 6 seconds, oh my God, 7, 8, 10 seconds. All of a sudden your legs start to feel jelly-like, and all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, then you keep pushing, you're huffing and puffing, your legs are jelly. So you're going into what I call the green zone. Now, the phosphate system are called the red zone. It means it's maximum effort. You're really taking the car to the maximum, the revs it in the red zone. The green zone I call green because that's the zone that, oh God, it feels a bit nauseating. You feel green. I remember when I was a young kid, and I went down from the first day of track selections, and I didn't have much history in track and field, and they put us through all different events to see what we liked. And the 100-meter sprint, I wasn't too bad at that. And when you got to the 400-meter, I said, I don't want to do that. That's just terrible at the end. And not just speaking for me. If you ever read Usain Bolt's book, I think I said Faster Than Lightning. It's a great book about his life. And technically speaking, Usain Bolt, the great 100-meter sprinter, is biomechanically more adapted or made for 400-meter. And he started at 400-meter, and he didn't like the training because it was always in the green zone. It's all lactate training. It's just gut-wrenching type training. He didn't like it. So he dropped down to 200, and so much so that he even dropped down to 100 because he found it not so, how can you say, gut-wrenching to train for. So even the greatest athlete in the world, arguably, definitely the greatest sprinter in the world, he actually dropped down to 100 meter because that green zone lactate system is really, it can be nauseating and it makes you green. But when you enter that system, what basically is that you can't rebuild your ATP fast enough to produce the energy that is required. So what it does is it still needs to rebuild your ATP. So what the body does, it needs energy, and you can't get energy from CP anymore because it can't keep up. So the body will go to another energy source called glycogen. Now, glycogen in the blood is called glucose. In food, it's called carbohydrate. It's pretty much it's the same. It's just in its different storage form. Glycogen in the cells of the body. So the body will go and get glycogen, and through a process of what we call anaerobic glycolysis, it will break glycogen apart, which takes a bit more time, right? Because it's not accessible. It's not in the cells, right? It's in the area, in the muscles, in the body. We carry it in the liver and all the muscles in the body, and it will break it apart without oxygen. Called anaerobic means without oxygen. Glycolysis means the breakdown of glycogen, and it will break that molecule down or carbohydrate down in the body called glycogen, and it will release energy, and that energy will be used to rebuild my ATP. So the ATP can be rebuilt, but it takes longer now because CP can't keep up. But hey, I've got a good supply of glycogen, and I'll start to eat into that. Now, body stores about 400 grams of glycogen, so it's not like we have loads of it. So it will do that, but to do that, because it takes longer, your force output or your energy expenditure output has to come down to meet the supply. You can't keep, producing more energy than what you're getting energy. That's impossible. So the body will slow down. So you notice when you do your 100-meter sprint, you start to slow down. If you're doing judo and you feel your legs are going to jelly and that bit, you start to slow down. If I'm fighting, I start to slow down. You watch a boxing fight, you see at the first 2 rounds, they really, and 3rd, 4th, 5th round, and they start to slow down because one of the metabolic byproducts of anaerobic glycolysis or breaking down glycogen is lactic acid. And lactic acid is released into the muscles, and it inhibits the connection between your filaments in the muscles that stop you from being able to contract. I won't go into that level of anatomy and physiology, but that gives you those jelly legs, because there's little cross bridges from the myosin attached onto the actin filaments in the muscle that pull the muscles to contract it, and they get inhibited by lactic acid, and you get those jelly legs. Now obviously you can, with training, you can build your adherence to lactic acid, and you can use it more effectively with training and conditioning by all means. So that's the lactate system. So if you look at maybe judo or taekwondo or boxing, there's going to be moments of bah, 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 which is phosphate, and there's going to be moments where you'll start to fatigue and you can't keep up, the CP can't keep up, ATP can't keep up to rebuild itself, so your body starts to draw into glycogen as a source of energy to help top it up. But you bring your intensity down, you get your breath, and that breathing, breathing in between those intense bursts of energy expenditure, that breathing after you tried to throw 3 or 4 times and they've resisted it, and then you're like, oh God, that was hard. Why didn't they go over? Or I'll punch someone, da, 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 and they come back and I go, okay, so that's what we call oxygen debt. So what your body is doing when you break away or you're adapting your gear, you try to get your breath, what your body is doing now is using the aerobic energy system, because the aerobic energy system is used to break down your foodstuffs, such as glycogen. The aerobic energy system is used to break the molecules apart and to rebuild them. Right, so your aerobic energy system is using your aerobic system to repair and recover your lactate system and your phosphate system. That's what the aerobic, that's what all that puffing is, because what your puffing is doing is using the oxygen to break down your carbohydrate and fat, because now we're using fat as another source of energy that's only used in the aerobic energy system. And the aerobic energy system relies on oxygen, right? That's the third one, the third gear, it relies on oxygen. So if I want to break down energy or break down substrates of energy, substrates is your carbohydrate, fat and protein. We're not using protein because that's not really a good source of energy. It's more of a building block. It can be used as a form of energy in last resorts, in survival, but in performance as carbohydrate and fat. So when you're in between bouts, or maybe in between rounds, or in between bursts of energy or series of throws and you're catching your breath, you're getting oxygen in the body to go down, to break down fat and carbohydrate, to release energy, to rebuild your ATP, right? It's rebuilding the ATP. So the energy released from breaking down glycogen anaerobically, that energy is used to rebuild your ATP. But you can also break down glycogen and fat aerobically, and that breaks the fat molecules apart, and that breaks the carbohydrate molecules apart to release energy to rebuild your ATP, so you can top up the petrol tank for your next burst of energy. So the aerobic system is used in these, what I call anaerobic type sports. Anaerobic sports is where the performance of the sports, the sprinting, the punching, the throwing is anaerobic, means you're producing energy without oxygen, which is the phosphate and the lactate system. So they're anaerobic performance sports, but the recovery of those anaerobic bursts is dependent upon the aerobic energy system. So when you're huffing and puffing, you're actually getting fitter by huffing and puffing, but you're getting fitter specific to the performance of the sport, because you're using the aerobic system not for performance like a marathon runner, you're using the aerobic energy system as a system to recover your phosphate and your lactate system. So the question is, what's the best way to get aerobically fit? To go and do aerobic performance training or do aerobics recovery training? We're considering that your sport of judo or taekwondo or boxing or kickboxing, the aerobic system is used as aerobic recovery system, not an aerobic performance system. A triathlete where it's all aerobic, mostly aerobic, or a marathon runner or a 5K run or a 10K run, that's aerobic performance. So we tend to train aerobic performance to get the benefit of aerobic recovery. Why not just train the aerobic system in the aerobic recovery process rather than the aerobic performance process? Which meaning, rather than going out and doing plug jogs or doing lots of long, slow distance type training, just do a lot of interval training. And many of you do that anyway, because interval is quite popular now, and rightfully so. for two reasons. Number one, it's very specific to your sport, right? So your intensity, you want to look at the work-rest ratios as your sport and try to replicate that in your training, and even make it even harder in your training. So the harder your training is, the easier the sport's going to be. But doing long distance isn't hard, it's just endurance. You want shorter, hard bursts of activity. Now, doing high intensity interval training is going to be better for that than going for long distance, and realizing in your intervals, in your rest intervals, that's where your aerobic system is getting a great workout, bringing in oxygen, using the oxygen to break down your food stuff or your macronutrients, carbohydrate and fat, to release energy to rebuild your ATP for your next burst, which is very specific to how it works in a sport such as judo or taekwondo or kickboxing or boxing or any fighting, or lots of sports are like that these days. So rather than go out plug jogging, save that time and do maybe, 5 30-second bursts, 15-second bursts, 1-minute bursts, and I progress it and I mix it up in my training. But now my cardiovascular training, my interval training is only about 10 minutes, but it's 10 hard minutes. So for example, last night I did a training session, and it varies depending on what stage of my program I'm leading into a competition. I finished off with 6 rounds of 20 seconds on, maximal effort, and 40 seconds off. 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off. So in that 20 seconds, because it's shorter and I've gone down to 10 seconds, like if I know I have to go for 10 seconds, I'm going to put 100% in. I'm going to try to put 110% in, which is impossible, right? Because if I try to fill a cup up 110%, I'll just make a mess. But mentally, I try to put everything in. The longer the duration, the more you start to pace yourself. And you don't want to do that. You want to maximize that intensity, and the best way to maximize intensity is make it a shorter duration, maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. If you want a bit more endurance, you may go longer. And what exercises do you do? Well, that's up to you. But my advice is specific to the sport as possible. So I've got judo training tonight. At the end of every judo training, I give them a high intense interval circuit or series of drills. So there's two things you can do. You can try to use some traditional weight training or conditioning training, but I still try to make it specific. So rather than doing squats, I do jump squats because sport is explosive. So I'd rather do, hey, you're going to do 30 seconds of jump squats. And then we have a 30-second rest, and then you're going to do 30 seconds of clap push-ups. Then a 30-second rest, and then you're going to do 30 seconds of jump lunges. And 30-second rest, and then you're going to do 30 seconds of dips. So they're all more traditional type movement patterns, but they are fairly specific. Because in a push-up, that's like pushing up in judo, or in boxing, I'm punching. Jump squats, yes, I go into a throw like Sianagi. If I'm doing jump lunges, well, that might be more like a toatoshi where my legs spread. So I'm conscious of the basic biomechanics and the anatomy of the movement, and try to pick an exercise that is not too complicated, where the intensity is coming down, where I can just focus on maximal effort without worrying about complexity. Because if I try to make it complex, then people aren't going to put maximal effort, because they'll be trying to do this complicated movement pattern. Clap push-ups, bang, right? So you may do some simple movements like that, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, or 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off. It's up to you about that work ratio. You have to play around with that depending on what sport you're doing. And I mix it up throughout. Sometimes I will make it a bit more specific. So in judo, I might do one push-up, then roll over, and do a roll, then push up, then roll back and push up, then roll, push up. I might do a squat where I do a forward roll, jump squat, turn around, forward roll, jump squat for the 30 seconds. So now I've got this forward roll, which is replicating what we do in judo, where you get thrown and you roll. Or in judo, I'll roll over to do the push up. So I might do more, rather than a jump squat, I might do a jump taitoshi type movement. In kickboxing, I might just do 30 seconds of, jab crosses, 30 seconds as fast as I can, or 30 seconds of repeat kicks as fast as I can. But I try to use movement patterns that are relative to the sport that I'm training for, whether it be for judo or taekwondo. I try not to get complicated movements, and in the gyms these days you see all these fancy complicated movements. But you've got to have to look at that movement and says, does that replicate what I do in the sport? And is the complexity of that compromising the intensity of that? And you see that a lot of time. The complexity is compromising the intensity. It means it's so complex I can't put 100% into it, because I'm trying to work out how to balance throughout it. Remember your conditioning, and if you really want to condition yourself exactly for your sport, then you're going to do in boxing or kickboxing, we just do rounds of fighting. There's nothing beat rounds with fresh fighters coming on, and in judo we do randori, that high intense randori. So that's ideally where you can get most of your fitness from, is actually doing the judo or playing the judo or doing the rounds in kickboxing or taekwondo. If you're going to do any supplementary stuff, make sure the supplementary is replication of the energy systems that are used and the work ratios that the sport requires in the basic biomechanics and anatomy of the sport, without getting too fancy and complex. At least then you can really focus on single-minded on, I'm going to get focused on purely getting my heart rate up as high as I can in this round or 30 seconds it might be. So hopefully that's given you lots to think about in your training. Obviously, I think from an anatomical, physiological point of view, doing the old traditional, getting on the rower and row for half hour, or hop on the bike for half hour, or an hour, or 40 minutes, or 20 minutes, or going for a road run, you're better off just finding a hill down the corner and do hill sprints up and down. Sprint up the hill, walk down, sprint up the hill, walk down. That's going to take your body, your heart rate, your muscle contention, your muscle activation. Is going to take your circulation. It's going to take your hormones to a level that is going to be more reflective of what you're going to experience in the moment of fighting, where your adrenaline is pumping, and as you know, you get tighter on the mat in the competition than you do in training, because you've got all those other factors of the stress and the expectations and the anxiety and the releases of the adrenaline, the noradrenaline, the epinephrine, the cortisol, that all gets released, and that just really brings you to that massive fight or flight alert level of the great hunter or gatherer for survival. But if you can control that and you're used to it, then you're going to use it and channel it to your advantage against your opponent. So make your training like hell, so your competition is like heaven. Great thinking, great training. See you in the next tips. Ciao.